And one of the things I wanted to do special for my patients was to get them to live to be an average of 100 instead of 75. So I began to collect information on what it takes to live to be 100 instead of 75. And it's very interesting. A certain percentage of my patients back then, in 1978, would say things like, I don't think I want to live to be 100. I said, well, why wouldn't you want to live to be 100? Well, I don't want to wind up in a nursing home and be abused. And I thought that was kind of reasonable concern. So I began to collect information on 100-year-olds that would satisfy me that I was doing the right thing to help my patients live to be 100. And this is the sort of evidence you can find. This happens to be from September 2000. This is a cover of this particular issue of Scientific American. It's a great little scientific journal that they use to teach the scientific method to high school kids and college students. And they write it in the 5th grade reading level so college students can understand it. And this particular issue is almost entirely devoted to human longevity. They had articles in there by experts in gerontology and genetics and nutrition. And there was a little summary at the end to tell you what you were supposed to learn in this issue. And they were editorially scratching their head trying to figure out what was going on because they were trying to find out what it was it would take people to live to be 100. And they compared the people who didn't listen to their doctors with the people who did listen to their doctors. They found out that the ones who did not listen to their doctors lived longer than the ones who listened to the doctors. Huh? And something we've known for a long time, right? So scientifically, they observed that, and they found out that the people who live longer salted their food, ate eggs every day, cooked and ate with butter, didn't use margarine. Many of them smoked. Many of them ate white lining behind the barn and were drunk all the time. The only exercise they did when they came home after work was to fall asleep on the floor. They didn't come home, take a shower, and go to the fitness center. And as I said, they ate eggs instead of egg beaters. They used butter instead of margarine. They ate their chicken skin. And they were just flabbergasted. They couldn't figure out why these people doing all the wrong things were living so long. Well, obviously, it's because the people who are getting advice from doctors are getting inappropriate advice. If the advice that doctors were giving was correct, then there should be a lot of people living to be 100 who follow the doctor's advice. So we're going to look at some of that. First thing I wanted to do is get some scientific evidence on what it would take to live to be 100. And I look for an animal model. Being a veterinarian and a pathologist, I look for an animal model first. And I ran into, doing some research, I ran into some stuff that was published in the 1860s, 1863. One was written by William Banting on how to cure corpulence. Corpulence is an old-timey word for obesity. And this was back in 1863. And he talked about a low-carb diet, kind of like the Atkins diet. Maybe it should be the Banting diet, instead of the Atkins diet. And then in 1935, a guy who'd been doing all his research in the 1920s by the name of Clive McKay came out with his landmark article in 1935. And what he did was essentially take 3 groups of rats. Group number 1, he gave the rat pellet of the day, and these rats lived to be an average of 2 years, which is really super. Because prior to this rat pellet coming out with all of the nutritional knowledge of the time, people who were using rats and mice and rabbits for research would give them rolled oats and carrots and cabbage and things like that, and they might live to be 11 months after weaning instead of 2 years. So it was really good to have a laboratory animal and a food that you could give them that routinely allowed them to live to be 2. He then took the second group, gave them the same basic pellet as group number 1, but he cut the carbohydrate calories by 30%, kept the vitamins and minerals the same, and they lived to be 50% older, 3 years. Got kind of excited about that. Took group number 3, cut the carbohydrate calories from group number 1 by 60%, kept the vitamins and minerals the same, and they lived twice as long. They lived to be 4 years of age, and they really got excited about cutting this carbohydrate calories thing. But it wasn't just that. When they redid the studies with spiders and beetles and worms and pigeons and all kinds of animals, they found out that it was the density of the vitamins and minerals per remaining carbohydrate calorie. That was the basic reason, because he had always kept the vitamins and minerals the same when he dropped the calories. He didn't just drop the percentage of food, he dropped only the carbohydrate calories, keeping everything else the same. So in group number 3, there was like 3 times more vitamins and minerals per carbohydrate calorie than there was in group number 1. Now that I had an animal model and had some idea what to do, I began to look for a human model, and I ran into a guy by the name of Art Linkletter. How many of you heard of Art Linkletter? Okay, great guy. He was funny. I put he and Jack Benny and Red Skelton and Milton Berle all in the same group. They could tell funny stories without saying dirty words and things, and great family comedians. And Art Linkletter wanted to live to be 100. And he wanted to live to be 100 because he read this book. It was a Pulitzer Prize-winning book published in 1933 called Lost Horizon. It was written by James Hilton. And in this book, Lost Horizon, James Hilton coined the term Shangri-La. How many of you have heard of Shangri-La? Okay, well, that's where that came from, that book. And Art Linkletter got real excited about living to be 100. Well, the book was actually written about a people called the Hunza. How many of you heard of the Hunzas? Okay, well, the Hunzas come from northeast of Pakistan, and they're a third world country, obviously, and Art Linkletter hired an eye doctor by the name of Alan Bannock, Dr. Alan Bannock, and this eye doctor was kind of an amateur farmer, and Art Linkletter funded him to go there for 6 months during the growing season and find out what their secret was to live to be 100. And it was very obvious from reading the book that Alan Bannock had not read Clive McKay's material on his rats. And he was just making lots of observations, didn't give his opinion what was important, but he was a very good observer. And one of the things he found out, these people were third world country. They had no electricity, no indoor plumbing, no hospitals, no pharmacies, no clinics, no doctors. They just used home remedies like herbs and massage therapy and that sort of thing. And yet they were the healthiest and longest lived people on earth. They came from a little mountain range, a little known mountain range by the name of the Karakoram Mountains, about 800 miles east of the Himalayas. Oftentimes people say they're from the Himalayas, but they're from the Karakoram Mountains. And one of the things Dr. Bannock observed was that they would irrigate with water that was kind of gray and opaque. It had lots of silt in it from the glacier grinding up the mountain rocks. And they would irrigate with this glacial water full of this rock silt, this finely ground up rock silt, about the same particle size as talc. And it contained over 60 minerals. And they would irrigate with this. And as the water percolated down into their fields and their gardens, it left a ½ inch to 1 inch of this gray silt on top of the soil. And before it dried, they would run out with their hoes and rakes, and they would hoe and rake this silt down into the soil before it blew away. Now, these people lived at the 19,500-foot level. Now, at 19,500 feet, you can't grow corn and potatoes and rice. Okay? They could grow wheat and rye and barley, but because of the very short growing season, their yields were very, very tiny. Their only carbohydrate they ate during the day, was a little tortilla, 1 tortilla a day. Little round flatbread. That was it. No other carbohydrate. The majority of their food was goat and lamb and mutton and camel and things like yak and rabbits, and they'd get some wild sheep and goats in the area. They'd eat chickens and eggs. They didn't have fish in those areas. They were too high up for fish. And so they cooked in butter. They used milk and cheese and yogurt. They could store dairy protein as cheese and yogurt. And that was it. They had a little garden. They'd grow a little bit of cabbage and tomatoes. Nothing else. They would also take the wood ashes from their fires, their cooking and heating fires, and put it in their gardens. How many of you ever put wood ashes from a fire into your garden? Yeah. This is a very old European and Asian custom, and somehow somebody learned that by putting the wood ashes from your fires into your gardens, it increases the yields and makes the food taste better and so forth. Well, it turns out the wood ashes are the minerals that are left when you burn away the carbon in the wood. So now I had not only an animal model, but a human model. They had a renewable source of minerals in their food. They were on a low-carbohydrate diet. And to me, it seemed it explained why they lived to be a ripe old age and were very productive. I also began to collect birthday announcements and obituaries of people who lived to be 100. I wanted to see really what happened to people when they lived to be 100. So I'll show you a few. Ralph Charles from Somerset, Ohio, about in the middle of the state, back in October of 1999, turned 100, and they had a nice little newspaper article about him and told his story. And the fascinating thing to me about Ralph Charles was that at age 100, he was still piloting charter flights and paying passengers around the central part of the United States. He used his single-engine Aranca aircraft. He didn't have any restrictions on his health papers or his license. Now, to me, he doesn't look like what you would expect a decrepit 100-year-old to look like. To me, he's very vibrant. He looks like he's maybe in his late 70s or early 80s, and he's 100 years old and still piloting. I mean, you can imagine, if he had Alzheimer's disease, he'd get up there and he'd say, "Excuse me, ma'am, where are we going?" That'd make you nervous, wouldn't it?